الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين شفيع المذنبين وخاتم النبيين نبينا وشفينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وهو أصدق الصادقين وقوله الحق أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون آمنا بالله وصدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Everybody, inshallah, you are all doing well. Thank you for joining this webinar. I'm going to talk about the physical, moral, ethical, and spiritual aspects of fasting in the holy month of Ramadan. Of course, as we are coming to the holy month of Ramadan, this becomes an important aspect of trying to understand the concept of fasting and the various levels of fasting. I was not able to actually give you the slides with the Arabic. For some reason, it was not loading on my browser. But you are, of course, well aware of this particular verse of the Holy Quran. And this verse is from Surah Baqarah. Of course, it's verse number 183, very well-known verse, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about fasting, and He says, "O you who believe, fasting has been prescribed to you as it was prescribed to those before you. And the purpose of fasting is so that you may have taqwa, so that you may become pious, so that you may become God-weary, so that you may have the awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." Everything in Islam, really, when you look at it, everything in Islam has different levels and different realities. It doesn't matter what act of worship you're talking about, whether it is fasting, whether it is prayer, whether it is supplication. Everything has an apparent reality, and then it has a reality that is deeper, and then there is an even inner core after that. It's something that Ayatollah Mutahari talks about quite a lot, when he does his analysis of different things, where there is, an apparent reality, then there is a reality of that issue based on morality and ethics, and then there is a metaphysical or mystic reality of that particular thing, whether it is fasting, whether it is prayer, whether it is dua, even when you think of the Holy Kaaba, if you think of Laylatul Qadr, these all have different levels of realities. When it comes to fasting especially, I have broken it down into basically three levels. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, the physical fast, which is the apparent outer reality. And in that is included the jurisprudential aspect. So it's also would be called the jurisprudential fast, a fast where the outer reality is based on the Sharia. And this is absolutely necessary, right? You're not able to get to the core of something until you actually peel the outer coating of it. So it's very important to make sure that when you're fasting, that you do conform to all the rules of fasting, all the jurisprudential rules of fasting, because without that, your fast may not even be acceptable. But just doing a fast based on jurisprudential principles and jurisprudential laws does not guarantee that the fast that you have correctly done is actually acceptable. And then you also have to make sure that not only is the fast acceptable, that's the second level where, the moral and ethical issues of that particular fast, the moral and ethical perspective of that fast comes in. But then it is also, the third level is that even, after an acceptance of an act, the question that you have to answer or ask is to say that even if my particular act has been accepted, that does not necessarily determine that it's perfected. So there is, number one, you carry out an act to make sure that the act is done in the correct way. After it is done in the correct way, it has the potential of being acceptable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But even after the act is acceptable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the question is whether it is perfected. And perfection, of course, only comes when you're able to ascend to a higher level of spirituality. And this is one of the reasons, when you look at the fourth dua, the dua number 44, I think it is of Imam Sajjad, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, where he talks about the, coming of the holy month of Ramadan. He talks about the holy month of Ramadan as Shahru Tamhis. Now, Shahru Tamhis, is really a month that is a month of purging. It's a month of testing. It's the month of testing your heart, a month of the purging of the hearts. It's a unique term that he uses, this Shahru Tamhis. A unique term which is only found in two places in the Holy Quran. And both of them are actually related to the Battle of Uhud in the Holy Quran. The first one, you will see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in chapter 3, verse 141, he says, وَلِيُمَحِّسَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَيَمْحَقَ الْكَافِرِينَ. He says that, that he's, so that he may purge those who believe and deprive the unbelievers of the blessing, right? So he's using this word, tamhis, as a word for the purging of the hearts. And then if you go into the same surah and you go into ayat number 54, he uses again the same word, وَلْيُمَحِّسَ مَا فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. Basically saying that he will test your heart, and then if you are worthy, you will be purified. So this is all in the context of the Battle of Uhud. And when you think about it, Imam utilizes, one of the interpretations, of course, there are probably many interpretations and Imam knows best. One of the verses, one of the reasons Imam utilizes this is because there is a very clear relationship between the holy month of Ramadan and the Battle of Uhud. And although I don't have the time to describe the Battle of Uhud for you, but you do know in the Battle of Uhud, there were three people, there were three groups of people. There was a first group that did not even want to be there in the Battle of Uhud at all. They just wanted to be at home. They didn't want to be any part of this battle. The second group were there, but they were only interested in the material world. They were interested in Baytul Mal, and that's why they were in Uhud. But then there was, of course, the third group, which was the genuine group, then who were there because they loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they loved the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And Imam, basically, the fourth Imam is saying that this is a month of tamhis, of purging, because Shahru Ramadan also has these three groups. It is, the first group is that group that don't even want to enter the holy month of Ramadan. They just want to have life, can stay as normal. It's just too hard. I don't want to be part of this fasting. It's very, very difficult. And that's the first group. The second group, they enter the month of Shahru Ramadan But they're just there physically. They're there physically, and they are stuck in that first level of fasting. They are stuck in the level of the physical fast. They're stuck in the level of the jurisprudential fast, and they don't move any deeper than that. And of course, then there is the third group, who also are the group of Ramadan of this month. And this is the group that actually love to be in this month. They understand the deeper realities of this holy month, and they want to use the holiness of this month, the grace and the benevolence of God on this month. They want to use that to ascend themselves to a higher level. And so this is the third group. And for this group, there is going to be tamhis. And that is why, the fourth Imam basically talks about this month as Shahrut Tamhis. Anyway, I just wanted to use that as an introduction, and you have the goals and objectives. So let's just go very quickly through these different levels of fasting. Of course, I want to now take a few minutes in a little bit more detail to talk about the physical aspect of fasting, the health aspect of fasting. Because one of the major issues, of course, with respect to fasting is to make sure that you conform to the jurisprudential fast. And that means you have to refrain from certain things, from Fajr to Maghrib, basically. And you have to refrain from these things, in your fast. This is a jurisprudential aspect of the fast. This is that outer coating of the fast. And of course, this becomes very difficult, especially when we are living in this, part of the world in the West, where the fasting for the next at least few years is smack in the middle of the holy month of Ramadan. Smack in the middle of summer, which is a very long fast, up to 18 hours. And of course, there is heat and all of those things. Some of the part of the fast actually falls within, some of the kids who are still going to be in school, at least until the end of June. And of course, for many of us, even though it is the month of fasting, because we live in the West, we still have to put in a regular day's work. So how do we make sure that that first layer of fasting, the physical fast, that we perform our duties in such a way that it allows us, to, have that energy, to have that focus, to have that vision of trying to make sure that we actually do whatever we can to gain benefits from moral, ethical, and spiritual levels of fasting. And so if you don't look after your health in this summer months whilst you're fasting, then you may not have that mindset, you may not have that energy, you may not have that focus in order to be able to gain benefit from all the incredible benefits that may be available to you on this holy month of Ramadan. So that's what we want to talk about. So if we go into the next slide, I don't know how to move this slide forward. Oh, there you go. Okay. So if we go into the next slide, as far as the physical fast is concerned, you have to, I've mentioned this before in a webinar similar to this, and that is you have to remember the 5 M's. And this may apply, more to some of the people who have some of these medical conditions, but it's also important to remember some of these principles, even if you are not suffering from these medical conditions. So the first M is around monitoring your health. How do you make sure that you monitor your health during this holy month of Ramadan, especially when you're going to keep away from food and drink for over 18 hours? The second thing is important to do some planning around your meals and understand what kind of foods you need to take in order to maximize, your comfort, at least with respect to your hunger and thirst during the 18 hours of the fast. You also want to make sure that you make the most of fasting. And because you're refraining from certain things and you're planning in your meals in a certain way and you're monitoring your health in other ways, there are some advantages that, you can take from this so that, you are able to sustain this even after the holy month has been completed from a medical perspective. The fourth is, of course, you want to manage your medications. And the fifth is a little bit around exercise and movement, especially in this summer months. And it's particularly important for people who may have, who may do a lot of physical training or physical exercise outside of the holy month of Ramadan to be really very cautious if you're fasting for 18 months. Monitoring your health is very simple, really. You're measuring parameters that are readily available, of course. So if you're a diabetic, you would measure your blood sugar on a regular basis. If you have high blood pressure, then you should really have a blood pressure machine at home, and you should be able to measure blood pressure. One of the things that people don't really use very much is changes in weight. And certainly if you have certain conditions, even like congestive heart failure and things like that, changes in weight can be quite an important thing to monitor because that will tell you how much fluid basically you have lost, during the fasting day. Of course, one of the warning signs that we want to be clear of is, dehydration. Dehydration is something that, we need to be very aware of, especially when it comes to the young children who may be attempting to fast, as well as the frail elderly who may also be attempting to fast. In diabetics, you want to monitor evidence of low blood sugar or high blood sugar, and certainly low blood sugar being much more common when you're fasting. So, things like trembling, headaches, dizziness, sweating, tiredness, extreme tiredness, and so on, what the slide has talked about, some of those symptoms. So some of the warning signs is some of the things that you want to be monitoring. The meal planning is really important. And of course, you want to avoid greasy foods. And you want to avoid these, peaks and troughs, that we tend to be very common in the holy month of Ramadan. Because when we have iftar, we just load up on fried foods, right? Samosas and kebabs, and then, we basically wash that down with, heavy sweets, either, heavy sweet related drinks, or, juices even have very high sugar in it. And this is exactly what you want to avoid. You want to avoid this peaks of high sugar and then the immediate decline that comes after that. It's really very detrimental to the body to avoid these peaks and troughs. You want to avoid increased caffeine and energy drinks. Remember, all your cola drinks are highly caffeinated and have a very high sugar, and they're very acidic in nature. So these are issues that you want to be very cautious about. You want to maintain a diet which is close to your regular non-fasting diet. Now, that means that your regular non-fasting diet is a diet of greasy fried foods. Then maybe there is an opportunity for you to make some changes in this holy month of Ramadan. What is important is that you have small, frequent meals and avoid what's called carbohydrate loading. So small, frequent meals are much more better in the holy month of Ramadan, it's challenging because the time between iftar and suhoor is so short, and people have to go to work the next day and so on. So it becomes a challenge. I understand that, but you still want to try and avoid the sort of loading of carbohydrates. Of course, if you want to take foods like this, there is nothing wrong in it if you were to take it in moderation once in a while. But to load on something like that is not recommended. If your family members are making too many greasy foods or sweet foods like this, you can just ask them to send them to me, and I will look after them for you for the whole month of Ramadan. Now, if you look at the meal planning, again, the most important thing is water. Water is the most important way, to really even start with your iftar, right? You need to have fluids. You want to avoid juices, like I said, they're high in sugar, cola drinks, which are high in sugar and caffeine, and they're acidic. And dehydration is a major concern because dehydration can cause clots in the legs, and it can cause quite severe constipation. And in fact, some people, during the holy month of Ramadan actually have to have some sort of a stool softener or Senosides or something like that. Otherwise, they have major issues with constipation. Remember, when you have really high caffeinated drinks, they're a diuretic, so it can actually make your dehydration worse. And I'm not saying you should not have tea before, when you break your fast in iftar time. Everybody wants to have a cup of tea, and I don't think there is any problem in that. It's just that you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to have, many, many glasses of tea, because in the long run, that may be a problem for you. Water is the best thing. And there is some really important recent evidence that's coming out around the use of alkaline water. So in most of Canadian cities, water that you get from the tap or even from, the water bottles that you buy, or even filtered water like the water that Canadian Springs has and so on and so forth, is actually quite acidic. And acidic water is actually not good for you, especially in the holy month of Ramadan in fasting. If you can explore, options for alkaline water, where you have water that is, of pH around 8 or over 8 even, that's the kind of water that would be probably more beneficial. And the reason for that is the alkaline water, is filtered water, and then it goes through a process where they make it alkaline. And the theory behind this is that alkaline water is actually more absorbed into your body than regular acidic water. A lot of the acidic water you'll see, you have lots of water before at suhoor, before your fast starts, and then you go to the washroom every hour for the next 4 or 5 hours, and that's because a lot of the water it doesn't necessarily stay in your tissues because of the fact that it's acidic. It's still better to do that than obviously to not have anything, because dehydration becomes a problem. But one of the things that you want to consider is probably alkaline water. You want to make sure that you obviously wake up for suhoor, and this is tough. It's tough because the timing is going to be like 2:30 in the morning in many parts of the Western world, and your iftar has just been at 9:30, and then you have to go to work the next day. But if it is possible, I would still really suggest that you wake up for suhoor and eat some protein, or complex carbohydrates. Cheese, rice, yogurt, all of these things are the right things to eat, in suhoor. What you don't want to eat is, kebab, fried kebabs and samosas in suhoor, with chocolate cake. Remember, a lot of people like to have cereal for suhoor, and that's okay, but some cereals have very high sugar content in it. So you want to make sure that you are aware of that. Oatmeal is very good. In the old days, we used to call it porridge, but oatmeal is very good. But you want to make sure that even when you have oatmeal, that you're taking oatmeal that does not have very high sugar in it. Always taking fiber, fruits, vegetables will avoid constipation, of course, and the feeling of hunger as well. Heartburn is common in the holy month of Ramadan because, of course, you're not taking any food, so the acid in the stomach is increased, and you are much more prone to having heartburn, so you want to avoid spicy hot foods as much as possible, and try to avoid eating just before going to sleep. Remember, if you do have a healthy diet, then that will have a significant impact on your other cardiac or heart-related parameters, and it will be easier to sustain these habits even after the holy month of Ramadan has concluded. And of course, this is an opportunity for us to make the most of our fasting. And one of them, for example, as you know, you are not allowed to smoke during fasting. And the best time, this is maybe the best time to think about considering to stop smoking and using sort of, nicotine patch and things like that. That allows you to maybe kick this habit. Also, for the young ones, controlling the junk food ingestion would be a good time to see if you can control that on an ongoing basis. And of course, for all the other benefits of fasting, one of the benefits of fasting, of course, is for us to develop self-discipline in areas of health as well as spirituality. So as we develop self-discipline, as we refrain from certain things, of course, one of the philosophies of fasting is that if you refrain from the basic necessities of life, like food and drink, this will develop your self-discipline in such a way that, when you're facing situations where you may sin, this will allow you to refrain from sinning. In a similar way, you can also translate that into the health field, and if you are able to self-discipline yourself in the holy month of Ramadan, then you may be able to use that as a means to develop good eating habits outside the month of Ramadan as well. Medication management, that's the fourth M, is of course very important. You must visit your family physician before the month of Ramadan, because definitely certain medications will need to be adjusted, and some of them may even need to be stopped temporarily, depending on the condition and the medications that you have. If you're diabetic, high blood pressure, and so on and so forth, there are things that can be done to allow you to fast in a very effective and safe way. Especially, for example, if you're a diabetic, you need to visit your physician in the holy month of Ramadan, because you'll need to develop a system where you're monitoring your blood sugar, during the day, and you're then able to make changes to your medication based on what your blood sugar is doing whilst you're fasting. You'll also need to monitor your kidney function at least maybe once or twice during the holy month of Ramadan, especially if you're prone to dehydration. And your physician will basically do what's called risk stratification. And that means he will classify you as a high risk, medium risk, and low risk, for fasting. Of course, high risk people for fasting, generally, we would advise that, they probably would not be able to safely fast, although the decision still remains theirs. And people with medium risk of fasting, basically can fast safely as long as they are being monitored and they follow very clear guidelines around meal planning and so on and so forth. And they have to, maybe some medication changes need to be made for that. And then, of course, there are people who are low risk for fasting, and they generally can fast pretty safely. But there are many new medications for diabetes and also for other conditions where your physician can potentially switch you to those conditions and you're able to actually fast in a safe way if your diabetes, is generally well controlled. But you really need to have that conversation with your doctor. Of course, certain heart medications, may require adjustment and some minor adjustments. But you should not be adjusting your own medications without the advice of a physician. It's very important that you just don't do that yourself, because when you are fasting 18 hours, there are tremendous amounts of physiologic changes that are happening within your body. And so you need to be very careful as to what you do. And you should not do it in isolation without the help of your own family physician or whichever physician you go to. Movement's very important, of course, in the holy month of Ramadan, because you're fasting 18 hours. By the time the afternoon comes, you feel like, very tired and lethargic and you don't want to do anything. But you do need to do a little bit of exercise during the holy month of Ramadan, but you need to be smart. For those people who really work out a lot, you need to avoid intense exercise, during the holy month of Ramadan. Basically, your muscles are just not going to be able to keep up with an 18-hour fast and an intense exercise regimen, even if you are exercising after iftar, at midnight. It's just not going to, it'll cause a lot more damage than it will cause good. But, range of motion, mild exercises such as a walk. Generally, I try to ask people to do it maybe 1 hour, prior to iftar. So you do a very light walk, and then by the time you finish your walk, it is time to break your fast. So the timing is very good. You don't want to do this in the middle of the day because you won't want to get dehydrated. And you may want to do some things like, park your car a little further away so that you can at least walk to the car, and so on. And if you are basically not a person who exercises normally, then this becomes very important in the holy month of Ramadan. Maybe this is one of the things that you may want to start, even at a very low level, so that you can sustain it after the holy month of Ramadan. But moving is very important. And one of the things it also stops, is clots in the legs, right, that then can go into your lungs. So it becomes very, very important to do that. Okay, so I think that's kind of more around the physical fast and giving you some tips around health and fasting around health and some of the strategies that would allow you to maintain your concentration and your focus to gain the spiritual benefits of this month. But as I started to say to you, fasting has different levels, right? And, the most basic fasting level is the jurisprudential fast or the fiqhi fast, if you want to call it that, or the physical fast. This is the most basic level of fasting. Fasting, just at a physical level, will allow you to probably feel the pains of hunger and thirst, and you may be actually able to gain benefit from some of the social aspects of fasting, in the fact that one of the benefits of fasting, of course, is to develop self-discipline and self-restraint. You may be able to gain that from a jurisprudential fast. And of course, the other benefits of a social fast, where, refraining from hunger and thirst makes you aware of, your fellow brothers and sisters, fellow human beings and humanity around the world who may be suffering on a day-to-day basis, who do not have food or even clean water to drink on a regular basis. So that realization and development of that empathy, becomes very important. One of the important aspects of fasting, which is the kind of social aspect of fasting. But sometimes what happens is that if you're stuck just at this level of a jurisprudential fast, in some people, actually have made comments, that, well, why does God want to make me suffer, and by keeping me away from hunger and thirst? And that's because they haven't really delved into, the deeper level of fast. So jurisprudential fast, very important. It needs to be, the rules of fasting have to be adhered to in accordance with whatever your own Maraja is saying as far as the rules of fasting are concerned, because your fast needs to be completed jurisprudentially for it to have even the potential of being accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you do not fast the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked you to fast and observe the rules of fasting, then the question of acceptance does not even come, let alone the question of perfection of that particular fast. It's an important aspect, but it's not an aspect that you just want to be stuck in. It's the whole point of this holy month of Ramadan should be, how do I ascend to deeper levels? How do I ascend to a higher level, of fasting, so that I can get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the next level of fasting really is the moral and the ethical fast. Here, every part of your body is fasting. This is beyond the jurisprudential fast. And if you look at the fourth Imam and his work, you will see that this is the fast that is anticipated from the believers. Really, when you look at the ayah of the Quran we recited in the beginning of this, lecture, where it says, Ya ayyuhal Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kutiba alaykumus siyam kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. This la'allakum tattaqun, is really the consequence, right, of fasting. This is really the purpose of fasting. Fasting really has been prescribed for us so that we may have taqwa. And just the jurisprudential level will not develop that taqwa. There has to be a deeper level of fasting that allows you to gain taqwa. Now, taqwa itself has, of course, different levels as well. But, that's where the journey of fasting really comes about in the holy month of Ramadan. And that's why the fourth Imam, Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, in his prayer on the arrival of the holy month of Ramadan, he prays again, he says, oh Allah, bless Muhammad and his household, and inspire us with knowledge of its excellence, veneration of its inviolability, and caution against what you have forbidden in it. But then look at what he says, and help us to fast in it by restraining our limbs from acts of disobedience towards you. and our employing them in that which pleases you, so that we lend not our ears to idle talk, and hurry not with our eyes to diversion. We stretch not our hands towards the forbidden, and stride not with our feet towards the prohibited. And our bellies hold only what you have made lawful, and our tongues speak only what you have exemplified. And we undertake nothing but what brings close to your reward, and pursue nothing but what protects from your punishment. Look at how the Imam is really talking about the moral and ethical fast. It's very important to understand this. And sometimes, even for the people who genuinely are not able to fast, the jurisprudential fast, because, they are very sick and fast is not wajib for them. Or even for those people, for example, who are traveling abroad, and because of that, they cannot do the physical fast. There is no reason why they can still not perform the moral and ethical fast. It still is something that you have to be constantly aware of, especially in this holy month of Ramadan, where all your parts of your body should be fasting. You're restraining your limbs, from acts of disobedience towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are staying away from idle talk. Your eyes are controlled. You're not looking at things that are forbidden, and you're not listening to things that are forbidden. Every part of your body is fasting, but it goes beyond that, right? The moral and ethical fast goes beyond that. Here, now you start to, appreciate, in this particular level, that there is more to this, where what you have to now start to do is you have to develop certain virtues of morality within yourself. So this is, for example, the time where you want to really reflect, on the names of God. Your whole outcome, your whole approach in this holy month has to have a divine color to it. All right, this is what Al-Mutahari talks about. He talks about having a divine color, right? What we have to do in this moral and ethical fast is to start to reflect and manifest the names of Allah within ourselves, right? And this is very important aspect of fasting. It's a fast that is expected of us. If you feel, if one of the names of Allah is that He is forgiving, He forgives, then the challenge for us is that how much of that are we going to reflect in ourselves? So how are we going to reflect that name of forgiveness within ourselves? If Allah is compassionate, then how much compassion are we going to reflect within ourselves? If Allah is kind, then how much of the kindness will we reflect within ourselves? If He is generous, then how much of generosity will we manifest within ourselves? That becomes a moral and ethical fast. Developing these virtues, and being able to develop these virtues in the context of reflecting and manifesting the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a very important part of fasting. I remember there are times, when sometimes you're at work and what happens is, you tell your workmates that, from next week, the month of Ramadan is fasting and I will be, and then the month of Ramadan is coming and I will be fasting. And of course, the workers at the work, they roll their eyes and they say, oh my God, so this is going to be a very difficult month for us. And that's what you want to try and avoid, right? And of course, one of the things is that fasting, because you're refraining from food and drink and so on and so forth, it also affects your morality and your ethics, right? So you become more angry, you become more frustrated, your fuse is short, you tend to shout and at other people. And there's a story, of course, you must have heard a story of the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this old lady. Once, the Holy Prophet was walking in the streets of Medina. It was the holy month of Ramadan, and he was walking the streets of Medina, and he heard this lady who was very abusive towards her servant. Her servant must have done something or not done something, but she was very abusive towards the servant. And in fact, to the extent that, I think even she was, she had uttered maybe some profanities, but she was very abusive towards the servants. And the Prophet stopped and he said to his companions, "Get me a glass of water." And the companions brought a glass of water for the Prophet. And the Prophet went to this lady and said, "Why don't you drink this?" And the lady said to the Prophet, she said, Ya Rasulullah, it's the month of Ramadan. I'm fasting. How can you offer me water? It's in the middle of the day. And the Holy Prophet said that you're not fasting. You've just refrained from hunger and thirst. That's all you've done. You have not actually appreciated the philosophy of fasting, and you certainly have not fasted the way fasting needs to be done. Your abuse of the servant shows that, the essence of fasting you have not done. You have refrained. You've done the jurisprudential fast, the physical fast, but you have not gone beyond that. So that's really an important message to understand. We would hope that at least we reach that level. But we really want to be able to move higher than that. And the higher level of that is the spiritual fast, or the mystical fast, or the irfanic fast. And of course, there are tons of lectures that one can give just on this. But it is something that I just wanted to give you a flavor of. This is the highest level of fasting, right? This is where one in the holy month of Ramadan is able to disengage oneself from everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every thought, every speech, every action that is carried out has a divine color, has divinity within it, and is done solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a fast where, you protect your heart from everyone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a complete dissolving of yourself in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is a journey towards reaching annihilation in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you reach this level, of fasting, the reward of such a fast is Allah himself, because he has stated, the fast is for me and I am its reward. And basically, you start to develop, characteristics of divinity within yourself. Because of this spiritual fast. And nothing can be a reward of such a fast except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As you gain more ma'rifah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then, as you gain more ma'rifah of Allah, you end up getting closer to him. And the peak of that actually, comes in the holy nights of Laylatul Qadr. That's the peak that a person reaches. The goal is liqa'ullah, right? The goal is meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one takes that journey and at least starts that journey towards meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a very important part of fasting, looking at sort of the spiritual fast. How do you gain, how do you do it? It's important to gain experiential knowledge of Allah, not just theoretical or conceptual knowledge. You need to, it's a journey where one starts to feel the presence of God. How do you feel the presence of God? you go again back to your second level of moral and ethical fast. You start to manifest his names within yourself to the absolute fullest capacity that you possibly can. You start to realize your potential, to the fullest capacity. And once you start to develop these characteristics within yourself, and they become what's called a malaka in your heart, they become a state in your heart, where you're not just trying to be compassionate. You become compassionate in your essence, for example. That's when you start to experience the presence of God. And there is no better time to do this, really, than in the holy month of Ramadan. And fasting is one of those things that allows you to kind of ascend to that level. So very important aspect. Like I said, this is a very short webinar, and I don't have time to expand on this very much, but it is an important part of fasting that you may want to be aware of. So remember that we need to change our perspective in this holy month of Ramadan. It's a month of, of course, the revelation of the Holy Quran, and therefore I really strongly feel that although there is a huge competition in trying to complete the whole Quran, and there is of course value in completing, the reading of the whole Quran, but I really think that it's important that we take time in this month to understand the Quran much better and not just read it. And reflect and contemplate, and break out from this shell of ritualism that we have, especially in the holy month of Ramadan, and basically, move beyond that, hopefully, in this holy month of Ramadan. I think I'm going to stop there. It's about an hour. I took about an hour. There is, of course, the webinar was supposed to be, I think, 2 hours or something like that, but we don't want to go that far. But I think it'll be good to, maybe take any questions from anyone who may have any questions. It's better for you maybe to type your questions because I'm on the phone right now, because the mic system wasn't working. But if there are any comments or questions, then I'm happy to Yeah, it's a good question. Is it advisable to drink lukewarm water while breaking the fast? Yes, it is advisable to drink lukewarm water whilst breaking the fast. The absorption is better, definitely, and there probably will be less acidity with lukewarm water. So yes, it is advisable to drink lukewarm water before breaking the fast. So by the way, just reminds me of one thing, dates, khajur, very important because of the fact that, they contain, very complex carbohydrates. And breaking your fast with dates is probably one of the best things you can do, because it doesn't give you a peak of sugar in your body, because it has what's called complex carbohydrates. So the absorption is much more gradual, and it has lots of fiber and goodness in that. So it's probably a good reason why our holy prophets and the imams suggested breaking the fast with dates. Yeah, dates are okay, even if you have diabetes. I mean, you don't want to load up on dates, but dates are much better than taking anything else that is sugary and high in carbohydrates. So having a couple of dates during iftar is absolutely fine, even if you're a diabetic. Okay, I think the questions are done. So I'm just going to ask the Ali, the Academy administration, should we end here or? Okay, so if there are no more questions, inshallah, we will end here. And one aspect, of course, of the holy month of Ramadan is that we all pray for each other in this holy month, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq so that we are able to offer all the aspects of fasting that we talked about in the webinar today, inshallah. And we pray with each other. We pray for each other, inshallah, and remember each other in our du'as. And of course, not forget our marhumeens in this holy month as well, and remember them in our du'as as well. Thank you very much for all your time. Inshallah. Khuda Hafiz.